It seems like the only way to meet new people nowadays is either on the internet or at the bar. However, quarantine had started due to COVID, and this made the situation worse. The good thing at the time was we were still allowed to go out for quick meals at local restaurants. One day, I matched a girl on Tinder. We decided to meet at a coffee shop for a quick lunch. "I'm Miranda," she said. She was beautiful, and I was hooked. Introductions turned into small talk, and small talk turned into a conversation. Before I knew it, we had been sitting at the table for over an hour, chatting. I regretfully announced that I needed to go back home, then nervously asked Miranda if she would like to meet me the next night for dinner. She agreed, and we set the time and place for our date. I was over the moon the rest of the night and most of the next day. My nerves kicked in on my way to the expensive Italian restaurant we'd decided on. She seemed interested in the money and materialistic things I had. I guess I should have expected it, as all my Tinder pictures were kind of showing off with nice cars and exotic vacations. Anyways, the date went amazingly well. Miranda let me order for both of us, telling me that she trusted my judgment. We chatted and laughed throughout the meal like we had known each other forever. We decided to go for a stroll through the nearby park after I paid the bill. We happily walked towards where she was saying was her home, a few blocks away from the restaurant. We then stopped walking in a dark alley. My fingers linked with hers, and just as I felt how cold her skin was, I noticed that she had stopped talking and the air around us had grown tense. My first thought was that I effed up. I looked at her, already asking if she was alright. She stared at me with blank eyes. Her lips formed a small curve. On my peripheral vision, I saw her other hand slowly reach out behind her coat. That is when she suddenly scared the living crap out of me. It was a gun. I choked on a gasp and tried to back away, but two strangers in all black with balaclava full face masks popped out of the dark. They spoke to each other in Spanish and aggressively screamed at me with an accent, "Give me all your money." I had two guns pointed at me, with one of the men going through all of my coat pockets. I was vulnerable and I was so scared my body froze stiff. I couldn't even mumble a word, and before I could tell the man searching me in which pocket my wallet was, he had already taken the three $100 bills that were in it. The man then threw my wallet on the ground, and all three of them talked in Spanish for another few seconds until they all started running down the alley until they hopped into a car. They then accelerated away, and that was the last time I saw them. I was in complete shock, traumatized by the robbery I had just been a victim of. I immediately called 911 while running back to my car, hoping they wouldn't come back. I told the cops what had happened and gave them a description of the people in the car. I drove back home that night but couldn't sleep for a few days. I went back on Tinder to see Miranda's profile, and it was deleted a few days later. Advice I have for the listeners would be to be careful with whom you meet. Things aren't always what they seem. Quarantine had just started when I moved to a new city in Canada. I had just gotten out of a bad relationship. Moving was a fresh start for me. Being single inside a new home in a new city, I downloaded Tinder. I didn't usually do dating apps, but I was bored and was looking for a little fun. I matched with a guy. He said hi and complimented me. He eventually asked me for my number, so I gave it to him. He asked to take me to dinner and for drinks. I agreed, and we met 3 days later. We met at a restaurant nearby. We went inside, ate dinner, and drank a little bit. It was a perfect date. He eventually drove me home. We kissed, and I told him I'd see him again in a few days. It was getting late, and I was into smoking weed at the time. I smoked a bit, and a little later I fell asleep. Later that night, I suddenly woke up to a noise coming from the window. It was dark, and I squinted my eyes to see if anyone was there. I jolted when I made eye contact with a man on the other side of the window. For a second, I didn't believe my eyes. I was still slightly high. I rubbed my eyes and looked around. I then realized who that person was. It was my Tinder date. I screamed out of fear. He began to panic and hit the window with what seemed to be a huge rock. He then started trying to make his way inside. I quickly got out of bed and ran out of my room. I then grabbed a kitchen knife and sprinted into my roommate's bedroom. She was asleep and was shocked by the loud bang when I closed her door. I told her about what was happening, and we locked her door and pushed her dresser in front to block the door from opening. I had left my phone in my room, so I asked her to call the cops ASAP. My Tinder date made his way through the house and started banging on the door, trying to open it. At this point, me and my roommate were screaming uncontrollably. I yelled out that the police were on their way, but he kept banging on the door. Me and my roommate, scared for our lives, kept pressuring the dresser against the door as hard as we could, holding our ground. We felt the man hitting on the door, shaking the drawers and what was inside. The man hit the door so hard, one of them completely came out from the dresser, falling to the ground. We desperately continued pushing on the dresser, literally battling for our lives. What seemed like an eternity finally stopped. There was no more banging on the door, and it looked like the man had left. We continued pushing the dresser though, just in case he'd come back or pretended to be gone. We stayed in the bedroom until the cops finally made it inside. They searched everywhere, but the man had already escaped. A police officer stayed with us for part of the night while the investigation group continued their search throughout the city. They were eventually able to catch the man later the next morning with their phone tracking software system. The man had apparently been living in an abandoned apartment not too far away from my place for a few weeks, and that's where they caught the man. It was a crazy night. My roommate and I moved out when we heard that the man was only going to be put behind bars for 4 months. He definitely had further intentions than a robbery, which was unfortunately the principal cause for which he pleaded guilty in court. The COVID outbreak is still in full effect, which is why I respectively moved back with my parents. I have since promised myself to never meet again with a stranger. Several months ago, quarantine had started, and I was bored of being stuck inside the house. I had been using Tinder for quite some time now, but never actually met someone through it. I thought, why not give it a more serious try? Quarantine had been going on for too long after all. I eventually matched with a girl who lived a kilometer away. She was pretty, and the messages were flowing. However, it didn't take long for me to realize she was a super private person. For example, she wouldn't tell me her last name, where she worked, or anything about her family. She made it clear that she was protecting herself, and honestly, I didn't blame her. What surprised me, however, was that she decided to tell me she had recently moved into a new apartment and lived alone. "I can tell you're a good guy," she messaged me. She elaborated that I seemed trustworthy. She then said, "I know how this might sound, but would you want to come over and watch a movie at my place? I am not looking for sex." I was taken aback by this. It's not every day I get asked to spend the night with a cute girl I just met. I figured she was either telling the truth or she picked a really odd way to initiate sex. Either way, it would be interesting. We talked for a bit longer, and I agreed to spend the night with her. I drove to her home and walked into her apartment. The night was going well and we had a few drinks. However, she wasn't kidding about the sex. I was a little tipsy and tried my luck, but I got rejected. We kissed and cuddled for a bit though, but nothing crazy. She invited me to sleep in the guest room, which I accepted as I was a little too drunk to drive back home. She went to her room upstairs and I eventually fell asleep. Not too long after, I was woken up by the sound of someone walking down the hallway. My room door was closed, so I couldn't see anything. I thought it was her, and I got up to have a look. I slowly opened the door, looked around, but I didn't see anyone. I walked around to check out the rest of the apartment. I went upstairs and back downstairs. Again, nothing. I thought my date had probably just gone to the bathroom and went back to bed. But on my way back, I realized that my assumption was wrong. I was walking back towards the guest room, and when I turned the corner of the kitchen, I saw, at the other end of the living room, a large silhouette standing there in the dark, perfectly still. The figure was large. There was no way it was my date. She must have been 5'2" at best. I turned around and ran all the way into my date's room. To my horror, she wasn't there. I was scared that maybe it was her boyfriend or husband. I called out her name, but there was no response. I could hear the man walking towards the room. My heart was beating so fast, I didn't want to get caught. I didn't know her or that man's intentions. I grabbed my wallet and keys on the counter outside the room and rushed back in and locked the door. I opened the window and without hesitation, I grabbed onto the window frame from the outside and let myself fall to the ground, only wearing my underwear. It was about a 6-foot jump from the window, but my adrenaline was so high, pain was the last thing on my mind. I ran to my car and sped away. I never heard from her again. Her Tinder profile was deleted the next day, and she never responded to any of my texts. Till this day, I still have no idea what happened that night. Do you have a true, personal, scary story to share? Send your 500 to 600 word horror story to goosebumpsterofficial@gmail.com. Please make sure you have well-structured sentences and grammar. Also, let us know how you would like your name to be credited on the video. Terrorize the like button and subscribe to the channel if you dare.
I'll see you soon.